Marcus Aurelius, warrior, philosopher, emperor. The closest Roman to Plato's ideal role of the philosopher king. He was a man committed to duty, who in all things strove to be virtuous. His life would be beset by tragedy, and his empire would be visited by a storm of plague, invasion, disaster and destruction. Though, in his early years, such things would have been regarded as fantasy. As a boy, he was kept close to his uncle, who was now his adopted father, Antoninus Pius. His focus was on his studies. In this episode, we pick up where we left off, with Marcus. Prosopography is defined as the description of a person's social and family connections, career, or a collection of such descriptions. Given the historical haze that blights the reign of Antoninus, such exercises often help us in cutting through this fog and give us a higher quality image of the heart of the Roman state at this time. And after all, as the saying goes, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. For Marcus, he was mostly surrounded by his tutors, and therefore knowing his tutors gives us an impression of the man he would later become. Many years later, on the banks of the Danube, fighting a war he deeply resented, Marcus would reflect on their characters and praise him for the lessons he learnt from them. These individuals provide us a keen insight into palace life and illuminate the people who are at the heart of the state. Before becoming the heir to the purple, Marcus had already demonstrated a disposition towards Stoicism. It's been suggested that Marcus got to choose some of his tutors, and from this pool came Apollonius the Stoic, whose lectures Marcus had already attended. Apollonius came from his native Chalcedon in the north of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. The poet Lucian recalls that when he was leaving his city, many of his students came to see him off, and in their midst was the ever-witty Demonax, a Greek cynic. Seeing the scene, Demonax shouted out, "Why, here is Apollonius with all his Argonauts," a reference to the Trojan myth of Jason and the Golden Fleece, ultimately criticising the high fees he charged, which Pius is reported to have found rather greedy. I'm sure Apollonius was not in the slightest bit amused. He was a serious character. Arriving in Rome, he was eventually summoned to the imperial palace to begin teaching Marcus. Surprising everyone, he declined the invitation, sending the message back that the master ought not to come to the pupil, but the pupil to the master. It's no surprise then that Marcus later wrote that he learned from him true liberty and invariable steadfastness. Antoninus, amongst others, didn't view him in this way though, later diffusing such an affront to his authority, joking that it was easier then for Apollonius to come to Rome from Chalcedon than from his house to my palace. Not being enthralled by Apollonius, Antoninus made sure to pick his own tutors for Marcus. Claudius Severus Arabianus was one such tutor, was an Aristotelian philosopher and a devotee to the old Roman liberties who instructed Marcus on the fight against tyranny and would advise to always be straightforward. The two would become close, with Marcus referring to him as his brother. Marcus was after all only 8 to 9 years younger than him. Later, the son of Severus would even marry one of the daughters of Marcus. His father had previously been the governor of the new province of Arabia which Trajan had carved out before Hadrian had abandoned parts of it, hence his name, Arabianus. Marcus wrote that he learnt of him love of family, love of truth, love of justice. Another such tutor was Claudius Maximus, whom Marcus ranked the second most important person he ever met. Active during the reign of Trajan, he served in the legions, first as tribune in Legio IV Scythia. They were stationed in Syria. He was too young to be involved in Trajan's Dacian campaign, with Birley's estimates making him 2 at the First War. He did, however, serve during Trajan's Parthian campaign, earning distinction from Trajan himself. After this, he went back to Rome, where he entered the Senate as quaestor, and fulfilled duties across different offices. He was then made the curator of the Via Aurelia, the Roman road hugging the northwest coast of Italy. He was then made the legate, the general, of Legio I Otterix on the Danube in Pannonia, and then eventually governor of Pannonia itself. With such a successful career, it's no wonder that Marcus writes that he learnt from him self-mastery and stability of purpose. The man was also a practicing Stoic, with Marcus learning not to show surprise, not to be daunted, not to be hurried, not to be at a loss or downcast. It is unclear when this next tutor was employed, but above all others Marcus praises the gods foremost for meeting him. Junius Rusticus, a statesman and a Stoic, who is ultimately responsible for the conversion of Marcus to Stoicism. Marcus credits the man for making him realize that he needed to train his self-discipline. If you've read his Meditations, you'll realize that this line dominates a lot of his thoughts. Interestingly, he also mentions that he was frequently displeased with Rusticus. Perhaps his management of anger came from having to deal with him. The Stoic lectures of Rusticus directly conflicted with another tutor of Marcus, Marcus Cornelius Fronto. Fronto was his only tutor in Latin, and widely regarded in rhetoric as being second only to Cicero. Over the course of Fronto's letters with Marcus, you slowly see him losing the student to the discipline of philosophy. Where Fronto taught the elegance of language and the weaving together of a rich verbal tapestry, Rusticus preached the Stoic virtue of simplicity and clarity. Fronto stressed to Marcus the need that emperors should not be tyrants. Rusticus cleverly used this against him, arguing that this implied that there was no need for rhetoric if the emperor was the sole decision-maker. Despite being bested by Rusticus, Fronto did impart on Marcus one great thing: affection and humanity. Fronto came from the Roman province of Africa. As a provincial equestrian and a new man, the first in his family to be a senator, he was all too familiar with and had a disdain for the snobbery of the Roman elite, a point Marcus readily agreed with. It would appear that Antoninus enlisted Fronto as a tutor of Marcus in 139 AD. This was roughly the same time Atticus arrived in Britain as we saw in the last episode, and in the same year when Marcus was given his first official post, Quaestor, and officially took the name as Caesar, a title emperors gave to their successors. Of all the tutors, only his correspondence with Fronto survives. I've read various different takes on these letters. Frank McLynn dislikes Fronto with every fibre of his being, calling the correspondence banal, and he identifies a young Marcus quickly becoming disillusioned with his tutor. Mr. Birley appears to see a budding mentorship, with the pupil simply outgrowing his studies after some time. Frankly, the letters contain much of what one might expect from a lesson in rhetoric: the importance of word choice and order, the difference one syllable might make on a speech, but they provide a window into the lives of these ancients. Writing at this time of 139 AD, Marcus was aged roughly 17. In accepting the title Caesar, Marcus had to give a speech to the Senate. I have not yet read the extract from Coelius which he sent, nor shall I read it until I, on my part, have hunted up my wits, but my Caesar speech grips me with its hooked talons. Now, if never before, I find what a task it is to round and shape 3 or 5 lines and to take time over writing. Farewell. Within this speech, or his later consul speech, Marcus would actually use a simile Fronto tested him on. The 9th simile I must call you in as my ally and adjutant, because my efforts to pin it down haven't been too successful. It is the one about the island of an area, which has a lake in it. In the lake is an island, and it too is inhabited. Fronto replied with the clarification: Your father carries on his shoulders all the troubles and difficulties of the empire, keeping you safe in his own calm breast. The partner in his rank, glory, and all his possessions. Fronto's description fit the bill quite well. Marcus was kept close to the side of Antoninus throughout his reign, and Antoninus will keep close to Rome, not wishing to burden the provinces with the upkeep of the imperial entourage. I've heard that Hadrian had previously caused a food shortage in Sparta simply by passing through the area with his entourage. At the beginning of the following year, 140 AD, after being entered into the Senate as Quaestor, Marcus was appointed to the position of consul alongside Antoninus. The office of consul used to be the most coveted position in the Roman political system, a dual presidency over the Senate, lasting a year. During the death of the Republic, the size of the Senate had ballooned from 300 to 900 people, then reduced to 600 by Augustus. The number of positions, however, had not changed drastically. With demand for offices increasing and the supply remaining still, Augustus began to normalize the suffect consulships. This was previously the method for replacing consuls who had died or resigned. Augustus purposefully had consuls resign just so that more senators could become consul, which helped to pacify the ambitions of the Senate. By the time of Antoninus Pius, this was standard practice, with 8 to 12 consuls in 1 year being common. Those who were consuls at the start of the year were called ordinary consuls. Those who had become consuls later in the year were called suffect consuls. It was also expected that consuls would later be awarded the governorships of senatorial provinces, usually by vote of the Senate. This would be their proconsulship. Ordinary consulships were far more prestigious than suffect consulships, as the year would be named after them. The position of consul had lost almost all of its former power, though it was still regarded as the most prestigious position, and sharing the position with the emperor was regarded with the highest honour. Sharing the consulship with Marcus, Antoninus was ramping up the role of Marcus in the administration. Marcus had participated in the governance of empire a year earlier, though it is likely now that at the age of 18 and 19, his role developed substantially. Much of this governance took place in the courts, presiding over cases which clearly interfered with Marcus's studies. Reading his meditations and letters, you get the feeling he just hated the stuff. Writing to Fronto, he explained, "Add to the fact that even if I want to study, the courts prevent me. They will take up whole days according to those who know." Though, even at this young age, he did not shy away from these duties. He also likely shadowed Antoninus as the response to the trouble in Britain was being organised. Writing after the fact, Marcus recalls visiting the estate of Pompeius Falco in 140 AD, who was a previous governor of Britain, and doubtless the developments in Britain would have been discussed. Later during this same year of 140 AD, Antoninus employed another tutor, Herodes Atticus, one of the richest men in the empire. He was considered the most naturally gifted orator of his day. His speciality was understatement, subtlety and irony. If you've ever been to Athens, the Odeon at the Acropolis was built by this same Herodes. Events are hosted there still to this day. As a side note, it's telling of Antoninus' personality that he had chosen to employ Herodes. Some years earlier, when he had been the proconsul of Asia Minor, Herodes had also been the prefect of the three cities in the same area. By chance, they had bumped into each other on the pass over Mount Ida. Both had refused to give way, and Herodes eventually shoved Antoninus out of the road. Despite an earlier attempt to bring corruption charges to Herodes, which he most definitely was guilty of, Antoninus clearly no longer held any grudges over this, and it gives weight to Marcus's appraisal that he would yield to experts in their field without envy. Where Fronto clashed with Rusticus over his teachings, Herodes clashed with Fronto on a personal level. The two were rivals, and at least initially, were utterly intolerant of each other. The pair even went to trial together, in Athens, on opposing sides, with accusations of murder. How would the people feel seeing such conflict in the imperial court? This was an imperial scandal in the making. The charge, well, this isn't known exactly, but Herodes had inherited a large amount of wealth from his father, though part of the will also bestowed upon the citizens of Athens a yearly sum of money. Herodes has since reduced this to a single payment, and then, to add salt into the wound, deducted any debts he claimed people owed to his father. Some people he calculated actually owed him money. A man named Demostratus was engaged in a legal dispute with Herodes, and had then approached Fronto for him to deliver his case, who was only too willing to oblige. We have letters where Marcus pleads with, and then commands Fronto to avoid dragging the name of Herodes through the mud. He spoke to Herodes too. "I've begged him not to begin, and I think I've got my way." It seems Fronto, rather unwillingly, toned down his rhetoric for the case, though he couldn't help getting one shot in, calling him an uneducated little Greek. The outcome of the trial is not known, though the future consulship held by Herodes suggests that he was acquitted. Interestingly, Herodes is completely missing from Marcus's meditations. The implication? He learnt nothing from the man. However, Philostratus paints a picture of a student and a tutor very fond of each other, even exchanging 3 letters on a single day. We should take this with a pinch of salt, seeing as Philostratus idolised the man, but I don't think this is an outright lie. Herodes was very intelligent and a highly educated man, which Marcus would have respected. However, he had an uncommon ability to make enemies and was prone to use violence. This would later lead to a scandal that I believe was ultimately responsible for his omission from the meditations. For the time being, however, they certainly would have clashed over his disdain for Stoicism. The Stoics taught that life is full of things that are outside of our control, and that we should not focus on the things that we cannot change. To this end, Stoicism demanded that one's emotions should be held in check, lest we lose control of ourselves to our environment. This was a point of contention for Herodes. He supposedly gave this pithy retort to the Stoics. These disciplines of devotees of the unemotional, who want to be considered calm, brave, steadfast because they experience neither desire nor grief, neither anger nor pleasure, are people who strangle the vitality of the spirit and gradually live out their days in a torpor of bloodless, innovated negativity. I will get around to talking about the Stoics at some point, but not just now. Admittedly, there was a growing class of self-proclaimed philosophers in Roman society at this time, who would have annoyed Herodes. Some converted this into an easy means of panhandling. For Herodes, he had first-hand experience of this. On one such occasion, a man draped in a philosopher's cloak, with a beard almost to his waist, stopped Herodes in the street and asked for some money. Herodes then asked the man what he did for a living. The man responded, "I'm a philosopher," and then rather aggressively questioned why it was necessary to ask what was obvious. "I see a beard and a cloak. The philosopher, I do not see yet," was his response. Meanwhile, some in his entourage identified the man as a foul-mouthed vagabond, at which point Herodes decided to give the man money enough for 30 days' bread. Not because he is a man, but because we are men. It wasn't the discipline of philosophy that Herodes disliked, rather that foul people usurp and spoil the name of it. There are also other tutors of varying importance. The two Alexanders, the Platonist and the one from Cotium, even the nephew of the famous historian Plutarch, Sextus of Chaeronea. My point is that there was a lot of them. One last important one to note before moving on was the jurist, Lucius Vossius Massanius. He'll appear in later episodes, but for now, he was Marcus's teacher in all things law. Being the tutor for Marcus and Lucius did have its benefits. The jurist Massianus was taken onto Antoninus' staff and employed as director of the public posting service so that he could stay in Rome. In the year 143 AD, Herodes was made ordinary consul, and Fronto made suffect consul. It would be incorrect to assume that Herodes was favoured above Fronto here. As a new man, Fronto was actually very lucky to receive this consulship. Fronto recognised this and wrote to Marcus, "What benefit is your Fronto conferred on you, that you have such affection for him? Has he given his life for you or for your parents? Has he successfully administered some province? Has he commanded an army? None of these things." The most important part of his consulship was to give a speech thanking Antoninus for the privilege. As Birley states, it was an opportunity for a public man to have his say about the course of events. It seems he nailed it. Antoninus' letter to him has survived. "You have done well to find something new in such a hackneyed and worn-out subject. I will not be guilty of defrauding you of your very well-deserved praise." Marcus also congratulated him, and some of his humour comes through. "In future, be careful not to tell so many lies about me, especially in the Senate. This speech of yours is horribly well written." Writing these letters over this period, Marcus and Antoninus would usually stay in Rome until the summer heat made the city unbearable, at which point they would move to villas around the capital or in Campania. Marcus would write from Lanuvium in the Alban Hills where Antoninus was born, and from Septincelle and Lorium, which both hugged the Via Aurelia. Letters would also be sent from Baia, an exclusive seaside town in the Bay of Naples, and from other villas across the Italian country. Much like a private citizen, Pius spent his vintage time with friends going on walks, fishing or hunting. When Pius had come back from the vineyard, Marcus tended to go out horse riding. One of these times, when he had gone out some way, he came across some shepherds herding their sheep down a narrow stretch of the road. On seeing Marcus and his company of bodyguards, one shepherd told the other to watch out for them, as people on horseback usually steal the most. Hearing this, Marcus charged his horse onwards and right through, scattering the herd in all directions. Understandably annoyed, one of the herdsmen threw their crook at Marcus, which landed on the lap of one of the bodyguards following him. Marcus recalled in humour, "So the man thought he was going to lose his sheep and lost his crook instead." It's hard to tell from the tone of the letter whether this is Marcus telling a story against himself, or a simple case of aristocratic arrogance. We also hear of a time that Antoninus and Marcus dined in the oil press room, and enjoyed hearing the country people making jokes at each other. Sounds like the modern equivalent of an aristocrat listening in on a building site. As the education of Marcus was underway, Aelius Aristides came to Rome and delivered his most famous speech, the Roman Oration. Sadly, I haven't seen any one date on when this was given. I've seen 143 AD, 144 AD, even 155 on account of his being too ill during the 140s, which I'm less inclined to believe. Before Rome's elite and the imperial household, he expressed the glory of Rome. As on holiday, the whole civilized world lays down the arms which are its ancient burden, and has turned to adornment, and all glad thoughts, with power to realize them. Cities gleam with radiance and charm, and the whole earth has been beautified like a garden. Now indeed it is possible for Hellen, or non-Hellen, with or without his property, to travel wherever he will, easily, just as passing from fatherland to fatherland. Neither inaccessible mountains, nor immense stretches of river, nor inhospitable tribes of barbarians cause terror, but for security it suffices to be a Roman citizen. In the speech, we also see something very interesting. Below the surface of laudatory statements, there is the genesis of an idea, one that would later define the political doctrine of medieval Europe. No one is so proud that he can fail to be moved upon hearing even the mere mention of the ruler's name, but rising, he praises and worships him, and breathes 2 prayers in a single breath, one to the gods on the ruler's behalf, one for his own affairs to the ruler himself. An impulse comes over me to change the Homeric line a little. Such within, I ween, is of Olympian Zeus, the empire. For when one ruler rules so many, and when his agents and envoys perform all commands quietly, without noise and confusion, and envy is absent, and all actions everywhere are full of justice and respect, and the reward of virtue escapes no one, does not this epic tone seem right, this version of the line? Although not outright stating the divine rule of kings, Aristides is implying that in the emperor, a divine mind was at work. It's evidence of a trend that would later materially manifest during the reign of Diocletian. The speech itself is a masterpiece of rhetoric. Historians often point to it as the high point of Roman civilization, and evidence of the Roman Golden Age. But was this really the case? Let's find out next time.